Welcome back, and it's time for Black and White. And joining me is none other than Janet Mbugua, who is a journalist, social media influencer, published author, a mother, activist. Have I covered all the bases?
I like the bases you've covered. I'm very happy with those.
Can we add more, or you're good?
I think that's okay for now.
Okay, now the latest obviously is your book, and I'd like us to just jump right into it because I think it's quite relevant, a subject not many people are talking about. So get into it. Tell us about your book, the title, and what inspired you to write this.
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
My book is on its way upstairs. I was bringing it on set and my mom brain left it in the car. So hopefully before the end of the segment, I'll be able to show it. But the book was inspired by, I started really becoming passionate about menstrual equality back in 2013 when, as a journalist, you really interact with issues and stories, and that captured me, seeing girls not having access to sanitary products, seeing girls having resolving to use chicken feathers and goat hide and really unsanitary products.
Chicken feathers.
Chicken feathers, soil. I mean, the list goes on in Kenya and in Africa and around the world. And I thought it's such an injustice because this is a biological process that they can do nothing about, and yet they have to handle it in such an unsanitary way. And it triggered me. And so I started really kind of learning more about period poverty and wanting to talk about intervention, information, and formed the Inuadada Foundation. And the biggest aspect of Inuadada was media and advocacy. Because of my background in the media, I was able to use that platform to almost make it a mainstream-ish conversation. I mean, my former colleagues were able to do that through a feature called Periods of Shame, and so I wanted to carry that forward. And so years later, I started realizing there's amazing interventions on the ground. People are trying to give girls and women access to information and products and bring men and boys on board. But there was still such a big issue in even just saying menstruation, talking about it.
We call it that time of the month,
that time of the
red moon, I don't know, Anti-Flow.
Anti-Flow.
You know, just the weirdest way of referring to it. But, you know, those are the things that make us distance ourselves from the reality of what every woman normally would face every month. And it is, as you said, biology. So you would imagine that if this is something that happens naturally, we should be afforded the way they say free education, because we all need education when they give free even condoms, you know, in toilets, because these are natural biological things. Then why aren't we at a point where even sanitary towels are afforded to everyone, wherever they are, just for free?
And that's exactly what we're trying to push for now. And so there's amazing colleagues in this space who are doing such incredible work. I'm happy that I've been able to view the policy, which was passed by cabinet and approved. It just hasn't been signed and made public. But I do I've gone over it and I've gone through it. And you know what? There is a mission to really mainstream and normalize menstruation, to give access, to address matters of sanitation, matters of education. So the policy in itself, in as much as I know we'll be unpacking it and interrogating it over time, because it's a 2019 to 2030 policy, it tries to address specific needs. But I know we ask all the time, why aren't these products free? There's a political aspect to it, obviously, but at the end of the day, girls and women should have access to these products. It's disrupting so many homes. You meet women who say, I have to choose unga over pads.
Exactly.
And I asked them, what about your daughters? And she says, well, she'll just stay home. That's what I did. You know, so it's a cycle of poverty that persists. And people need to understand something. Menstruation affects everyone. It doesn't sound like it. You'll hear a lot of sometimes men say, that's not my issue. But I'm like, it kind of comes back to disturb you because it feeds into the poverty cycle, the crime cycle when you have people soliciting sex for pads, HIV, teen pregnancy. If we don't manage this process with dignity and in a healthy way, it disrupts all our lives and it disrupts the economy.
And we have kids actually getting boyfriends so that they can help them buy them. Then they get pregnant or get diseases, drop out of schools, and these are future doctors and presidents and what have you. So it's quite important, and it's an issue that affects everyone. So Janet, your book, what I love is that it sampled women from various categories in life. We have the modern millennials. I saw over 25 in there. We have someone who's a ex-convict, I think. We have a sheikh even coming out to speak about this. And I'd like to start off on the sheikh bit. But religion is one of the elements. While it's good for us, it also is instrumental in, shoving some of these issues behind because we're ashamed. So how did he come into the fold when it came to this book?
So when I looked at my journey through my foundation years later, I started saying, man, we really need to normalize this conversation. We're struggling. And I was like, how do we do that? I'm very passionate about storytelling. I feel like stories can influence opinion, influence policy, because it brings to reality the issue.
Sure.
So initially I was just going to collect stories, and then I started becoming intentional and saying, we've never really heard from a woman with disability. We've never really heard from a woman who's blind. We've never really heard from a woman who has been in prison. What do they experience? But at the same time, they all had their first time. And so the book is called My First Time because I wanted to start with, let's talk about the first time we had our period. And for the men who are featured, the first time they heard about it. And then let's draw from all your personal stories the deeper issues, disability, poverty. One of the women featured there, the oldest woman in the book, Tumpesia, who's close to 80, talks about being a child bride and having to tell her older husband, so many complexities. Nice Lengete, who's one of the biggest icons of our generation, who's also in the book, talks about wanting to hide in shame because in her culture it meant she was ready for marriage. So there's a lot of nuances we don't consider around it. So I wanted to do this simple tool. Let's tell the stories and let's also focus on the issues. But it's not all doom and gloom. Some of the people there are celebrating their...
and this is something that should be celebrated, as you have implied. So because having your period means you're healthy, it means you can have kids. I mean, it's good. And you have had your own personal experiences with your first time, obviously, and with menstruation. Would you mind giving us your...
It's in the book. It's the first story. And it's funny you asked that because it's my period has always been very problematic. I think it's always haunted me, and it's one of the reasons I was inspired to write that. I was 10, so I was such a kid.
Typically, it's supposed to be 13.
Supposed to be 12, 13 onwards. Now you're having girls as young as 9, which breaks my heart because they have no idea. The trauma, imagine that trauma, right? An 8-year-old as well. There's cases of 8-year-olds. So I was 10 and I thought I was dying. And my mother was so shocked because she said, but you're so young. But she quickly prepped me. It was a school day. I had no choice. She's like, wear these. Don't let boys touch you. Don't play with them. Go to school. That was my... and it was very painful over the years. I had endometriosis. I had to have my ovarian cyst removed. I still struggle with a very painful and very heavy period, and I have to be on birth control to manage it. So it's kind of always been an issue, and then I realized it's an issue for so many people. Fibroids and endometriosis are keeping women from working.
Okay, so let's just pause on that. The pain that you experience. A lot of people or women have normalized pain during the period, their periods, and they go without having some of their conditions, without having some of the conditions addressed by a medical practitioner because this to them is normal. Could you address that?
That's a really good point. And I really like that you've said we've normalized pain, which is such a shame. If you're having pain that's persistent and really as bad as mine was, because mine was on a scale of 1 to 10, it was sort of like between 7 and 8. Please be checked. It's not normal. It's not normal to be in excruciating pain, and it's not normal to menstruate for more than 7 or 8 days. It means there's something wrong with you. So please check. It could be fibroids or endometriosis. And then you'll have the specialist advise you what to do. So that's something that I've said before on my social media. Don't ignore the pain and don't ignore the prolonged menstruation. And it's funny because when you speak to some people, there's a group of women I spoke to in an informal settlement, and one of them said her sister is physically assaulted by the husband because, and I said, why? She said, well, it's because she menstruates for up to, let's say, 11 days.
What?
And so he says, you're wasting all our money on sanitary products. So you see, people are not informed. So this poor woman
is being bitten supposed to make it shorter, or
because he doesn't know what's happening, and she doesn't know what's happening. So I was telling this woman, you have to take your sister to hospital. What she's going through isn't normal, and he can't keep assaulting her. He might end up doing something that's irreversible. And so the book for me is, can we have the conversation? Can we see different faces? Different stories. I tried to make it as inclusive as I could. I wanted every girl in Kenya to pick up a book, whether she's mixed, whether she's from a different region, from a different setting and religion. I wanted her to see her face,
in that book.
So that's why I kind of wanted to make it sort of like a picture series.
The color is very appropriate.
I know, yeah.
It's red.
The publisher long took the chance. So they've never published a book like this before. And they just said, so you're going to keep the name?
Yeah, my first time,
and they said, you're going to keep the red.
The red, yes.
I'm not going to
and it moves away from that shame that we are talking about, it needs to be celebrated and not be seen as this dirty thing, you know.
And that's what the Sheikh said. What was incredible was having a Muslim man who calls fellow men to prayer, saying, you know, it's healthy blood. That's what he called it. And I love that he was able to just do away with the taboos and stigma and say, we support women. Whoever doesn't is not really walking by faith.
By faith, yes.
And I even have a pastor there as well.
Because Christianity also, while we don't condemn anyone for their period,
can perpetuate the stigma, right?
but there's a certain fear, a certain confinement that is mental, not really physical, that comes with when you think of propriety and things that you should